opportunity. So today we are studying in the book of Genesis. We started a long chapter, chapter 24. And it's a long chapter because it tells the story and then retells part of the story. And today we're in the retelling part of the story. But it tells the story of when Abraham realized he needed to get Isaac a wife so that the promises of God, that Abraham's seed would be like the stars of the heavens or the sand of the seashore, would be able to be fulfilled. By the way, I was having some discussions this week with Rick Joyner, and he was saying that as we were discussing things on Thursday night, we were just sitting together, and he was saying that promise, he said, do you know how many stars there are in the universe? There's billions and billions of stars. And, we've only got, 8 billion people on the earth right now, and that's more people than have lived since Adam. So we've got, and they're not all Abraham's descendants by any stretch of the imagination. And so now we've got this situation where we're looking forward to the promises of God being fulfilled. And so Rick was speculating about whether or not during the millennium we're going to see a huge population increase so that some of those promises can be more reflected or mirrored in reality. And of course, we can give it that it's not just Abraham's physical descendants, but also his spiritual descendants. We can say they're part of the stars or a part of the sand of the seashore. But Abraham knew that if Isaac didn't have a wife, none of that was going to happen. And so he got his servant. We saw this all last week. He got his servant and he sent him on a mission up into his old territory, his old stomping grounds, to find a wife for Isaac among his relatives. And we're going to have that rehearsed to us today, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. What I am going to point out today is that when God moves in his providence, there is a response that is needed. And we're going to see that today in a very clear way, as those who did trust in God were able to recognize that a response to his providential direction was needed in their lives. So we are in Genesis chapter 4. We're starting with 22 today, going all the way through 51. Fasten your seatbelts. So now if you remember, what has happened is the servant has given God a very specific, Abraham's servant. He's never named, by the way. It doesn't say he's Eliezer, and actually Eliezer, who was mentioned previously, is the one who would inherit everything Abraham said. That was years and years and years ago. And so Eliezer may have died already or retired in a sense. He's no longer the chief guy. So, and we never hear this servant's name. It's just the servant of Abraham, his chief servant. And so now this chief servant was given this direction by Abraham to go up to his hometown and seek out a bride. And he gets up to the hometown. He really gets up to the hometown and he prays and he says, show me the young lady you have for Isaac. I need help with this. And he says, this is what's going to happen. The young women were coming out from the town to draw water. It was in the cooler part of the day, and he says, let one come out who, when I see her, I ask her for a drink, and she says, here, drink, and then I'll also water your camels. He had 10 camels. That's not a minor thing. She'd have to go down to the spring, fill up her jug, and then pour it into the watering trough, run back, and she'd have to do that at least 10 times, probably more than that. Yeah. To be able to, he said 20, and I agree. It's just, that's a lot of water camels drink. And so this is not just polite. Yesterday I was on an airplane, and a lady dropped an AirPod down into the seat. Now, you know what they always say, don't lift up the seats and dig underneath them and stuff? They were doing that. And I was watching this. We're landing, getting close to landing, and they have her seat all ripped apart. And I'm like going, this is really entertaining. Is something going to blow up, like a life raft? I don't know. But anyway, finally, some guy says, okay, I'm going to find this. He gets on his belly on the airline floor. I know, it's gross. Think about it. He gets on his belly on the airline floor, and he can't find it. And so after we land, he does it again. And he finds it because when we landed, the thing shook out of where it had fallen. So he finds it. It was really amazing. Because we all thought it was gone. You know, who's going to find this AirPod? But that's hospitality, if you want to think about it. That's someone going over and above. He wasn't related to the lady or anything. Okay, that pales into comparison to watering 10 camels. I mean, the time investment. I mean, he had to be willing to sacrifice his shirt. In fact, most of us would probably have gone home and burned the shirt. But he he was helping, but she went over and above in a way that was certainly supernatural, that something was on her that was getting her to go over and above because the Lord was showing the servant, this is the young lady that you asked for. And so it says he was watching. That's how we ended last week. He's watching to see if this is actually going to happen. Is she going to water all 10 of the camels? It says, so when the camels finished drinking, yes, she was watering them all. So when the camels finished drinking, the man took a gold ring that weighed half a shekel and 2 gold bracelets for her wrists that weighed 10 shekels. Then he asked her, whose daughter are you? Tell me, please, is there a place in your father's house for us to stay overnight? So he asked for water. Now he asked for a place of lodging. By the way, it was not that odd of questions. It was not unusual for a stranger at a watering hole to say, could I have a drink? Asking someone to water your camels would be over and above, and he didn't ask her to water the camels. She voluntarily offered that. And then usually you'd go into the city gate to find someone who was willing to offer hospitality. He already knows his quest has been answered. Because while he was praying and saying, Lord, this is what happens. He knows this is the young lady. He doesn't even know who she is yet. He knows this is the young lady that the Lord has set up. So he gives her a gift for her help. The gold ring is about 2.2 ounces in our weight. And that would, so it would make it what the price of gold right now is. A lot. So the ring would be about $700 in our price. Our prices right now. And gold is one of those things that you can watch and you can figure out how an economy is doing because gold will always hold its value. Because if the economy shifts, the price of gold goes up because the value of gold is stable, but the currency in the culture is not. So you end up spending more for gold because that's how much it's worth now based upon how you have devalued your money. So anyway, she gets this. Now, by the way, that's the price of the gold, not the price of the craftsmanship. If you go to a jeweler and you say, hey, I need about a carat diamond in a gold setting, the jeweler doesn't say, oh, well, the diamond's costing this much and the gold is costing this much. This is how much it's going to cost you. Oh, no. There's the craftsmanship charge. And then the profit over and above. I mean, all of that has to be added in. So when I'm saying this is a ring that he's giving her already that's worth $700 in gold, in our prices, we're talking some real, this is a huge gift. She's just watered 10 camels, and he's given her a gift that is way huge. By the way, we are only told here it's a ring, which means it could be an earring or a nose ring. Later on, we hear it was a nose ring. Have any of you thought of using that? It is Mother's Day, husbands. Have you thought of offering your wife a nose ring? Not our culture. Okay. You know what Dawn would do? It wouldn't be pleasant. No, she'd say, thank you for the thought. Can we melt it? Anyway, but it's a gold ring for her nose, and later on it says he put it in her nose. This is kind of in our culture we'd think, ooh. Okay, don't know if it's on the side of the nose or the center of the nose. I don't know any of that. But anyway, probably we don't need to know. It's not our culture. So he gives her a gold ring, and then he gives her 2 bracelets. That's 4 ounces worth. And that would be 4 ounces would be, the bracelets would be $13,000 in just materials. This isn't a bad haul. She's watered 10 camels, and all of a sudden she has these amazing, I'm just telling you the amounts that they're worth in our culture, because you have to understand, this woman had to be overwhelmed. Rebecca had to be overwhelmed because she now had some things given to her that she had never thought of having. I mean, they have somewhat of a wealthy household because they got a place to stay. I mean, we're going to find out there's more there. It's not like she's from an impoverished household, but you just didn't give away items like this to people you don't even know. And so she had to be overwhelmed by this. And so when the servant says, hey, do you have a place that we can stay? Now, by the way, that's 10 camels and all the men that were needed to transport and protect those 10 camels. Camels weren't that prevalent in that culture because they're expensive, and Abraham had tons. And he had the servants to be able to send a retinue up and protect the camels and to watch everything. And so now all of those people, all of those men are sitting there, and he says, hey, do you have enough room for us? And that's and so he's asking it's a request for hospitality. Again, not unheard of in that culture. Usually in the city gate, usually the young lady who Rebecca's probably 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there. This would not be the person who would be making the decisions, but I think she was pretty overwhelmed. She responded to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She also said to him, we have plenty of straw and feed and also a place to stay overnight. Then the man bowed down and gave honor to Yahweh. He said, blessed be Yahweh, the God of my Lord Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my Lord. I am on the road Yahweh has led me to the place. I am on the road Yahweh has led me to, the house of the brothers of my Lord. That's who's being identified. Okay? Rebekah's family is Abraham's family. Nahor was his brother. And she says, hey, I'm the daughter of Bethuel. That's her dad. But Milcah and Nahor are the ones that Abram knew. So she's the granddaughter of Abraham's brother. That is a pretty close relative. That means Isaac and her would be cousins, not absolutely close cousins, but cousins. And he was right. He goes and he ends up. Again, they didn't have GPS. Okay? When I want to go just about anywhere, I open up my GPS program on my phone and I punch in the directions, even if I know the way, because it's going to tell me the best road conditions that are out there right now. And it's going to be a time where we are able to say, oh, this is the best route because of traffic and all of that sort of stuff. It's wonderful. They had none of that. He's being told, you head up in this particular direction. This is where they live last, but who knows? And all he could do is give generalities anyway. And so on the way, he'd be asking people, am I on the right place to go up to Haran? And so he'd be headed in that direction. And he ends up outside of the city. It doesn't even identify the city because it may have been the city which later became known as Nahor. And so he's out there and he says, Lord, I need this response. And the very person who comes out and fulfills the criteria is Abraham's family. And that's just, you understand why the servant fell on his face. He was overwhelmed by what God had done. And Rebecca's overwhelmed because she's going, yeah, we got plenty. She's like, oh my goodness. She knew her family. if you're about to walk into the house with about $20,000 that you suddenly enrich the family with, you're going to be able to go back and say, we should probably put these guys up for the night. I mean, that. I think we can afford it, with all of that. So she said, yeah, we've got plenty. Now notice, he did not follow her. Laban had to come out and invite him. It would have been inappropriate for him to accept hospitality from her. It had to come from the family. And so he waited out there. We'll get to that. But his response is, the servant realized the Lord's hand is on him. And he begins praising the Lord God of Abraham. And we're going to talk about Yahweh in just a minute, as I always do, but we'll get into the next verse before I do that. So, because there's a very important point on Yahweh in this next verse. It says, then the young girl, this is 28 to 31, then the young girl ran and reported these things to the house of her mother. Rebekah had a brother, and his name was Laban. He ran outside the city to the man who was near the spring. When he had seen the ring and the bracelets upon the wrists of his sister, and when he heard the words of his sister Rebekah, when she said, this is what the man spoke to me, he went out to the man who at that time was standing with his camels by the spring. He said, come, blessed of Yahweh, why are you standing outside the city? I have put the house in order, and there is a place for the camels. So Laban runs out. She comes back and she reports, by the way, the house of her mother. That is, a lot of people say, wait a minute, where's Bethuel? Okay. Is he dead? Well, he shows up later on. But some people, based on that, start saying, well, it must have been a matriarchy. That was possible in those cultures, ancient cultures. More than likely, it just means there was a woman's side of the compound and a men's side of the compound. And that's probably all it means. And she went to the women's side of the compound, made her report. They made her report to the people, and then they got in the men of the house so that Laban could go out and be able to offer hospitality. And so she came and she reported, and then Laban heard and saw. I mean, we sometimes really, Laban gets a bad rap. And he gets a bad rap because of the fact how he later dealt with Jacob. Okay, and we all remember him from that, and we're all going, because we know that he wasn't the nicest man to Jacob. But I think he gets a bad rap here if we're saying he's operating out of greed. Because anybody would respond like this. Anybody would. If all of a sudden a teenage daughter, it comes running in. Now, first of all, we'd think, whoa, why is someone giving my teenage daughter 20 grand? Okay, that would be a real problem. But it's a family member. This is a representative of a family member. That would make it all different. But anyway, so when he sees and he recognizes the generosity of the person who's able to give this type of a gift, this is a gift of a king, which is really what Abraham was. I mean, he was a chief prince in his area. He was being negotiated with as if he was a king. I mean, so he was, when his servant later calls him great, it means, he was great. He was a chief prince in the area. So Laban responds, but here's the really interesting thing. He says, come, blessed of Yahweh. And that's like ding, 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 ding. Why did Abraham send his servant up to his household? Because his household up there also worshiped Yahweh. And it wasn't just Abraham and his family, it was the entire family worshiped Yahweh, which is why Abraham and later Jacob went back up there to retrieve a wife, because they worshiped Yahweh. Together, they worshiped the true God. Now remember, and those of you who may not have been here previously, as we've run into the word Yahweh, that is the word which was often in the past translated Jehovah. And in modern translations, it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And the tetragrammaton is what it represents, which I have up there in Hebrew. And then the English letters, the 4 English letters, consonants, which would be the tetragrammaton. Here's the interesting part. Our modern Bible translations translate Yahweh as Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, because of the Jewish sensibilities. Because Jewish people will not read the name Yahweh. When I am working with Jewish people and I am about to present a translation, one of my translations to them, I'll change it to Adonai or Hashem. Okay, I won't put Yahweh down because of their sensibilities. I'm trying to build bridges of relationship, and I'm not going to do something that is offensive to them. But if I'm doing my own Bible translation, I'm a Christian doing a Christian Bible translation, I am going to make sure I give God his real name. Now, names are important. I ran into a guy yesterday at the airport as I was checking in, and he says, "I like your name." And I knew instantly what that meant. It meant his name was Randal with one L. Okay? Because if it was just Randal, two L's, like the normal spelling of it, he wouldn't mention it because there's a lot of Randals. There's just not a lot of Randals with one L. And I looked at him and I said, "You spell your name with one L, don't you?" He goes, "Yes." Because I knew it was, that was his name. And he said, "Yes." I says, "And you're always saying to people, and that's with one L." And he said, "Yes." We're high-fiving. No, we weren't. But we have a similar lived experience. And the lived experience is that because normally Randal spelt with two L's, that whenever we say our name and someone's writing it down, you have to say with one L. And then I'll usually add the other L's in the middle initial. My parents were being economical. You can only use so many L's in your name. So anyway. Names are important. Well, you understand, we're in the image of God. His name is important too. It was so important to him that when he made the Mosaic Code, he said, "Don't misuse my name." But it wasn't about how you pronounced it. It was how you lived it. And the Jewish sensibilities became such that they, as they put fences around everything, don't work on the Sabbath, so now you have to count your steps, which is real work. You have to count your steps on the Sabbath. You put the hedge around the law. Well, how do you stop people from misusing God's name? One of the ways that you do it is you make sure they never pronounce God's name. And that's not the intent of it, of course. And so, but anyway, Laban knew the true God. And when he came out and spoke to the servant, he didn't say, "Oh, come blessed of the Lord." He said, "Come blessed of Yahweh." And they were communicating. You could use the word Lord for any of the false gods that were out there. But that wasn't what he said. He identified the God that he was talking about, which is, by the way, the reason the prophet says, thus says Yahweh. Thus says the Lord. You can read in the Old Testament where false gods were called by their adherents their Lord. It's just... The servant is calling Abraham his Lord, Adonai. Most translations will translate it master, but I'm translating it Lord because that's what Adonai means. Okay, so we've got, I was going to say a Christian household. Well, no, it's a household that worships the true God at that time. The man entered the house. This is the servant and his retinue. Laban unloaded the camels and gave straw and feed to the camels, and also brought water to wash the servant's feet and the feet of the men who were with him. When things were set before the servant to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I can share my message." Then Laban said, "Speak." Notice Laban is the one who's pretty much in charge right now. By the way, it becomes clear that Rebekah and Laban have the same spirit of service on them. Now, Laban is inviting someone in. He has said, "I've put the house in order." We saw that in the last verses. And now he invites them in, and Laban is the one that takes care of the camels, with his servants, of course. And he gives straw and feeds the camels, and he brings water to wash the servants' feet and the feet of the men who were with him. And the servant is Abraham's servant. And the feet, and so he does the same thing Rebekah did, going over and above, and then gets food and sets it before them. Again, this is a lot of people. And they're going out of their way to be filled with hospitality. And they are just ready to have a nice meal with them. And the guy says, oh, wait a minute, not yet. So amazing hospitality on Laban's part. But the servant says, I'm not eating yet. I got something to say. His men are all sitting there looking at the food on the table. Be quick about it. But the servant says, I have something to say. And so Laban says, okay, go ahead. And it's because Laban's speaking that sometimes people say Bethuel wasn't there. Later on, he shows up and it becomes clear he is there. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. Yahweh has greatly blessed my Lord so that he has become great. He has given him sheep, cattle, silver, gold, male and female servants, camels and donkeys. That's a lot of stuff. Okay? Lots. Sarah, the wife of my Lord, bore a son to my Lord when she was old, and he has given him all that is his. So they knew Abraham. Of course they knew Abraham. They had probably been exchanging information with the caravans that would go through between the two areas. They had heard that Milcah had, that Bethuel, that Milcah had borne Bethuel, who had borne children. I mean, so they knew each other's. Abraham knew that. He had heard that report. We heard that previously. And so they were keeping in touch. It wasn't quite as fast as Zoom, but within a couple of years they would know, or, email. They would text messaging. Within a couple of years they'd get the latest information. So, and they also knew probably what was going on with Abraham, although maybe not about Isaac yet, but maybe they did. And so they knew Abraham. And so he says, this is where he's setting the stage for the request. Okay, you got to put yourself into the shoes of Bethuel, Laban, all the family. This servant's about to make the big ask. Yeah, I'd like to just spirit her away so you'll never see her again. To a land you don't know about, to a master you don't know. So what's he have to do? He has to convince them that she will be well taken care of if they allow her to go. So what's the first thing that he says? Hey, Yahweh has blessed him. He's become great. That he's a major chieftain. He's given him all of this stuff, and he lists the stuff. By the way, they didn't need to use their imaginations. They saw it. They had just seen a little bit of what his camels were carrying. By the way, this was the bridal price they were carrying, and they were getting ready to spend. They were going to give a lot for this bride. And so this was all setting the stage as they are negotiating, in essence, for what he's about to ask. And then he says, Sarah, the wife of my Lord, bore a son to my Lord when she was old, and he has given him all that is his. So the prospective husband now is in charge of the entire estate. She's going to be a princess if she comes with us. She is going to be over everything with her husband. And because Isaac's a great prince, he's now got the estate. By the way, remember, Abraham has a son named Isaac. Nahor has a son named Bethuel. Next generation. They might think that Isaac is the same age as Bethuel. And, that they're about to marry their 15-year-old daughter off to a 60-year-old guy. Okay, that's what they could be thinking. So what does he do? He chops that out from underneath their legs. Says, no, she bore him a son in her old age. And you can imagine there were questions. Well, how old was she? Well, she was 90. Automatically they know, no generational difference. Okay, that it's not that big of a. It was normal to marry teenagers off to 30 or 40-year-old men. Okay, in our culture that's like what? But that's the way they did it. Okay, and so he's taking care of all of the questions that could be there. And so he says, hey, this is who I'm talking about. So they now know this is someone who is basically a prince or a chieftain in the land. And then he tells the story about what we already heard last week. He says, my Lord made me take an oath saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites who I am living among in their land. Instead, you shall travel to the house of my father, to my family, and take a wife for my son. I told my Lord, it is possible that the women may not travel with me. He told me, Yahweh, in whose presence I have walked, will send his angel with you and will grant you success on your way. You will take a wife for my son from my family, from my father's house. Then you'll be free from my oath when you come to my family. If they do not give her to you, you are free from my oath. And so we saw this last week, this whole thing, and he's taking the oath, and he doesn't bring up the fact that Abraham, he'd asked Abraham, what if she won't come? Should I take Isaac back to there? And Abraham says, by no means. He drops that part. He doesn't even want that to enter their heads, right? They'd say, well, yeah, we'd be happy to give her up, but he's got to come here. That's not going to work. So he doesn't even mention that as a possibility. So today, I came to the spring and said, Yahweh, God of it, my Lord Abraham, if you will please grant success to my path upon which I have traveled. Look, I am standing by a spring of water. Let it happen that a virgin comes out to draw water. And when I say to her, please give me a drink of a little water from your jar, and she says to me, you may drink, and I will also draw water for your camels, let her be the wife whom Yahweh has assigned for the son of my Lord. Before I was finished praying in my heart, at just that moment, Rebecca came out with her jar upon her shoulder. Now, we saw this last week already, and we saw how Rebecca comes out. By the way, how does she know she's young, marriageable, not married, all of that? Probably how she was dressed. Culturally, there may have been different ways that they presented themselves based upon whether they were married or not. So she went down to the spring and drew water. I asked her, please give me a drink. She hurried and brought her jar down to her hand, and she said, drink, and I will also water your camels. Then I drank, and she also watered the camels. So I inquired of her, asking, whose daughter are you? She responded, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put a ring in her nose and the bracelets on her wrists. That sounds so wonderful. Yeah, the bracelets on the wrist sounds wonderful. Okay, so Rebecca did her part. She fulfilled exactly the conditions, and he kind of puts things out of order because we saw last week that, first of all, he gave her the rings and the bracelet, or not last week, we saw it earlier in this story today. He gave her the bracelets and then asked whose daughter she was, and he just puts it a little bit out of order. He's retelling the story. That's the prerogative of the one telling the story. I also bowed down and gave honor to Yahweh and blessed Yahweh, the God of my Lord Abraham, who led me on the correct road to take a daughter of a brother of my Lord for his son. Now, if you will act with loving kindness and truth toward my Lord, tell me. If you will not, tell me so I may turn to the right or to the left. Okay, all of this story was headed in one direction. He had to convince them that it was the Lord's will. So he gave honor. He says, I instantly gave honor to Yahweh. I was out there and I was blessing the Lord because this is an amazing thing that has just happened. I have come out to the family, the relatives, the brothers, that because it's even nephews and could be called brothers or would be. And I've come right to the household. And this young lady is from that household. He says, I'm praising God for that. And now, based upon all of this, if you will act with loving kindness and truth toward my Lord, tell me. If you will not, tell me so I may turn to the right or to the left. So I can check my options and figure out what's going on. Did they still have loving kindness and truth? Emmett and Kesed, or Kesed and Emmett. Did they still have that toward Abraham? Did they have a fondness in their heart, a loving kindness that was willing to help him out because he needed a wife for his son? Were they willing to step forward and do this? And he asked the question. Then he said, and if you're not, I need to know because then, I'm staying the night, as I said, but I'm out of here in the morning because I have to go on with my mission and find out where the wife is. Or be free from the oath, because Abraham said if they're not willing to send her, you're free from the oath. Now, what happens next is honestly incredible, because we get the response of people who worship God. And I want you to put yourself into the situation. That morning when they woke up, they had a chance to be able to Laban see his sister Bethuel, kiss her on the head, say good morning, daughter blessed by Yahweh, whatever. And their household, they were probably beginning to think, she's getting a marriageable age. We're going to need to find a good person for her to be married to. All of that stuff was happening, but they're thinking she's going to move across the street. Okay, you understand? Another down the road. That they're going to see her, and they're going to see their grandchildren, and this is going to be just an addition to their household, and their household is going to gain strength and love and relationship. And now they've got this stranger who shows up late in the day saying, I want to spirit her away so that you may hear a report from her on occasion, but you will never see her again. That's a big deal. And so now he just puts it to him. They've listened to his story. Now understand, they've listened to his story. They've known him now for about an hour and a half. And they've been told the story. And I don't know about you, but after an hour and a half, I would have a hard time entrusting my daughter to anybody. But after they heard the story, it says, Laban and Bethuel responded and said, the situation comes from Yahweh. We cannot respond to you negatively or positively. See, Rebekah is here in your presence. Take her and go. Let her be the wife of the son of your Lord, as Yahweh has spoken. That is amazing. Like I said, Laban gets a bad deal or a bad press because of how he treated Jacob. And he was a rascal. However, here, if this is all we knew about Laban, we'd say, what a guy. This is amazing that he and his dad were like, yeah, this has got to be the way it works. Why? Because Yahweh's involved and they were convinced of it. You know what that means about how they knew the ways of Yahweh? The ways of the Lord, they understood the ways of the Lord in a way that helped them to be able to respond. A rank pagan might have been coerced by the amount of money that was obviously available, but their response wasn't based upon anything other than what the Lord had done. That's what they looked at. They didn't look at the bridal price that would be offered. They didn't look at the fact that it was Abraham. They didn't look at the fact that Isaac was a great prince in his own thing, although that probably did not hurt. They could not feel guilty. But that's not why they responded. They responded because Yahweh has spoken. Has he said a word? But he's done what was necessary to show that he was speaking. So, Laban and Bethuel responded. They're convinced it's the Lord's working. And they said, we cannot interfere. That's what it means to say we cannot respond to you negatively or positively. They're like, we're just getting out of the way. This isn't, if we get in Yahweh's way on this, we're in his way. And I don't want to be in his way. And so they say, we're going to do it, which means the quest is successful. The servant's going, well, that was easy. When the Lord is in it, it can be easy, right? But here's, and this is the reason I do have the title for this, is the providence of God demands a response. Because what was going on with the servant and with God's setting things up and his prayer requests, that was the providence of God. Have you ever asked the Lord, Lord, I really need an answer to this question. If I get the next 4 stoplights green, I'll know it's you. And if you get all 4 of them red, you really do have an answer, right? Right? Because you just are like, okay. If you get 4 green, you're still going to say, like Gideon, well, now I need a little bit more information because that could have just been coincidence. But by the time you get 4 red in a row, you're thinking to yourself, God hates me. Yeah, you're like, please, Lord, 1? Can I have 1 green out of the 4? Okay, but there's a scripture in Romans 12, and there's many of them that we could turn to, but it says, the Apostle Paul says, therefore I encourage you, brothers, through the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a holy living sacrifice that is pleasing to God. This is your appropriate way to worship. And what the Apostle Paul in Romans 12 is saying, therefore, based upon all of the things that I told you that God does for us. Because that's what's going on. He's saying that what God does is amazing. And he says, therefore, based upon the providence of God, based upon what he does for us, what we need to do is present our bodies as holy living sacrifices. That's pleasing to God, and it's an appropriate way to worship God. And what we see is Bethuel and Laban, they are worshiping God by saying yes. They're saying it's obvious that God has set this thing up, and we are not going to get in the way. It is appropriate for us to worship him in this way, because we worship him with the activity in which we get involved. And I can say to you right now, there are many ways that God is speaking to us through our circumstance all of the time. And one of the ways that we respond to him is by recognizing it and saying, Lord, because of the fact that you are so obviously guiding me in my life, I want to continue to do my best to serve you. I want to be that living sacrifice. I don't want to crawl off the altar. That's one of the things someone, is the common statement in Romans 12. The problem with being a living sacrifice is you can crawl off the altar. But if we know the providence of God, as we know the life, and now we add in the forgiveness that we have in Jesus Christ, we have even more. But sometimes when God is working around us and through us, we're like that servant. We go, I can't believe that God just lined that all up. What he just did is amazing. And what do? You do the same thing the servant did. You give honor to God. You worship him. And then if there's a task involved with whatever God is lining up, you step into it. That's the correct way to respond to the providence of God. So there's more to this story coming up, and there's more of God opening the doors and things happening, and Rebecca's will being involved. Remember, she's heard the entire story by now. It says, here is Rebecca, she's with us right now. She's right before us. She's been involved in this entire conversation, so she knows. Can you imagine being her? I mean, at some point she was saying, I wish I wouldn't have watered those camels. But she understood. She probably was thinking to herself, why am I doing this? I don't normally water 10 camels for people. There aren't that many camels around here. And that might be why she offered, because she didn't realize how much they drank. Who knows? But this is an amazing thing that God has just brought. And I want you to know the ways of God don't change. Watch what he does for you. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity today to be able to study a story from the book of Genesis, which reminds us of your ways. And Lord, when we say you are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you are still the God of all those who call on you, we see how you work. And I ask that you help us respond appropriately, always. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.